Today I'm going to talk a little bit about what I consider to be the 5 elements of writing, particularly writing fiction and particularly writing a scene. I think they're all really important to writing, and if you've got long stretches of text where you're missing one of these particular things, then it can start to feel quite boring and the reader will know that there's something missing. So in no particular order, they are action, dialogue, description, exposition and internal thoughts, or just thoughts. So let's just do a real quick breakdown of what each of them are. So action is an action. He picked up the book. I walked to the shops. She had a drink. If you've got big chunks of text in your story that misses action, what that's going to do is start to feel really stagnant and kind of weary and slow. We like to see a bit of action, we like to see things happening. Even if it's two people having a conversation, it's nice to see them doing something. You have to be a little bit careful with this. You know, you don't want to mention too many times of how they pick up their cup or how they're, he put a bit of steak in his mouth and started chewing on it. That can kind of get a bit boring as well. But certainly have your characters performing some kind of action in every scene, otherwise it's just going to feel very dull and lifeless. Too much action and you're likely to bore the reader, because action by itself isn't exciting. It might seem like it should be, but it's not, because if we don't have a good sense of who this person is and why they're performing the action, it's just an action. This is why it's actually often advised not to start a book immediately with action, because it could be the most exciting action in the world, big explosions going off and guns and bullets and stuff like that and dragons, but if you start with action, we've got no context. We don't know why this is so vital, what the stakes are, why it's important. All we know is that all this crazy stuff is going on and we don't know, we've got nothing to attach it to. So action by itself, too much action can kill your story. So again, in no particular order, I'm going to go with dialogue next. Dialogue is obviously your characters talking to each other. It can be more than two people, but it's a conversation. Now, again, if you have long stretches of text where there is no dialogue, this can start to feel really dense, in my opinion. You see a big chunk of text, you can really quickly see on a page where dialogue is, because it's a nice fresh white bit of page with just the odd sentence, rather than a big chunk of description or action. So if you don't have dialogue, it can feel really dense, but also we kind of lose a sense of who these characters are. We want to hear them talking. One of the main things that we do to interact with people is to talk. So definitely make your characters talk. If you find that you've got big stretches of story where they're not talking, give them a conversation. Try and make it relevant to the story, give it some conflict. It can be an argument. Make it an important conversation that somehow, even in a small way, changes the course of the story, but have them talk. If there's something that needs to be done in the story, some kind of action that needs to be performed, then maybe they don't perform it straight away. Your characters don't go ahead and just do this thing straight away. They could argue about it and think, well, actually, let's not do that. And then the other person's like, no, let's do it. And straight away, you've created a bit of conflict and a bit of tension, and you've broken up those big chunks of description and action. Too much dialogue, and it can start to feel a bit too... I've heard it described as floating head syndrome, where it's just people talking, and you don't really have a sense of where they are, who they are. All you can see is people talking. The next one I'm going to go with is description, and that is, of course, when you are describing the world around, or describing a room, or describing an object, or describing a person. Again, if you have vast chunks of text without any description, we start to lose a sense of where we are, who the people are, what everywhere looks like. If we've just got kind of action, he's doing this and she's saying that, and there's no moment of pause to describe what everything looks like, it's kind of like having your eyes closed and just not being able to picture any of it. Too much description and you're likely to get a bit too bogged down. It's going to feel a bit boring. You're describing these vast landscapes and stuff, but it doesn't really mean anything, because we're not you're not telling a story, you're not giving us action and dialogue and stuff that goes within that story. You just, we might as well be reading a guidebook or looking at a photograph, because we're not getting any kind of narrative, you're just describing stuff. The next one is inner thoughts. She couldn't believe how angry she'd felt that her car had been stolen, or I looked outside and I was reminded of being a kid again and going on the swings, or whatever. Obviously that's rubbish, but you know what inner thoughts are. Too much of it and we can start to lose a sense of the outside world. It's very claustrophobic and internal, and all we can hear are this person's thoughts, and we haven't got, again, any kind of context to apply it to. All we know is that they're thinking all these things, but we need a bit of the outside world. We need a moment to breathe and also to voice some of these thoughts to another character. I've read books where it's big chunks of just inner monologue, thinking about stuff, and it can work, but generally we also want a bit of action and description and dialogue to flesh it out and to make it more colourful. Now the last one, and there's a reason I've saved this till last. I was originally going to make this video the 4 elements of writing a scene. The last one is exposition, and the reason I've saved it till last is because the other elements that I've mentioned on this list, I think your book will really suffer if you don't alternate between those elements, and if you miss one of those elements out, your book's not going to be as good as it could be if you put that element in, except for this last one, exposition. So what is exposition? Exposition is where you're kind of describing things that you really can't describe through normal description, dialogue and action and thoughts. It could be a little bit of backstory. It could be if, say, your character works in a factory. It could just be a bit of description about what that factory does. Now, arguably, I think almost any exposition that you give can be described with those other 4 elements. So the factory example that I just gave, you don't necessarily need to describe what the factory does. You can show it through description, you can have people talk about what's going on in the factory, and you can have people performing the action that you do in the factory. So exposition is the one on the list that I would say definitely use sparingly. I think you can definitely use too much of it, where you're just describing stuff to the reader, explaining stuff. There's nothing more boring than, being explained to. Show it. It's that old adage, show don't tell. Exposition is like almost 100% telling. Show it through the other 4 elements. Can you have not enough exposition? Like, is it possible to have a book where it really needed more exposition? In my opinion, I would argue it's always better to err on the side of less rather than more. We want to know what's going on, and we want context, and we need to be told certain things, but I really believe that you can do it with those other 4 elements: action, description, dialogue and inner thoughts. But that's definitely one that's up for debate. I just know that it can be really boring to read that. We don't want a textbook, we don't want a guidebook, we don't want an encyclopedia. When you're building a world, even if it's quite a simple world, like a real life story, we don't like to be told everything. We like to see it unfolding. So that's why I left that one till last. So there we go. I hope you liked that list. If you did, leave it in the comments and leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers, guys.